weekends. Sometimes yay, sometimes nay, but as a 15-year-old, I can't say that's too far off. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. And this very special weekend in late January, we would take the full weekend to Railfan, Central Florida on January 23rd to the 25th, spending our 2 nights at a hotel in the area. We usually do something like this every year, and we didn't do one in 2020, so here we are now, making the most of what we can find on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Just after 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday the 23rd, and we got a train immediately calling signals just up the S-line. Oh yeah, it's Q441, nightly mixed freight from Waycross, Georgia to Tampa, Florida. He's certainly late today, getting through here in daylight, something that I haven't seen in quite some time. Yellow-nosed 2-liter and 2 extra Jeeps. While that made for a great daylight catch on the S-line in Plant City, it wasn't all fine and dandy. From what I know, the reasoning of this delay was because of a vehicle strike in Hilliard the night before, and I believe that the strike was fatal. And if you looked closely as the lead engine passes, you can still see part of the car on the plow. Afterwards, me and a few friends would drift over to Lakeland to see what the rails would grant us there. Q452, daily mixed freight out of Miami to Waycross, Georgia, was finishing his duties up at Winston and was ready to continue north on the S-line. And this is where job briefings really help on the radio. As 452 was requesting to leave Winston, the dispatcher made a specific note important to us. He noted that up at the 10th Street siding, if they made it there before the other train did, they would have to stop and wait for an opposing K81120 empty phosphate hoppers off of the BNSF Railway at Cicero, Illinois, back down to the Bone Valley, to get past first. So we moved up to Fairbanks Avenue to shoot both trains, with 811 having a nice surprise on the head. Besides orange juice, phosphate is one of the few commodities from Florida that is shipped backwards. Loads go north, empties come back. Since phosphate is mined here in Florida and produced here as well, it is shipped out to customers up north and overseas. So once those loads have been delivered, the empties gotta come back down here. So here they are now on K811. One of BNSF's companions stuck on the train from Cicero made it down here as the power too. The clock's minute hand only ticks a few times before Q452 is out of the 10th Street siding and rolling. As he starts to roll by, the average rail fan wouldn't at first assume this is 452, with a block of sulfur empties at the head of the train. This is in part due to precision scheduled railroading and partially just efficiency measures. Since 452 makes a stop at Winston most mornings anyway, instead of waiting to send the sulfur empties back north on Q604, a regular mixed freight from Winston to Waycross, they tacked them on 452 and got them off their hands a little quicker. But what was close to the end of the train wouldn't have been expected on any Florida mixed freight train. A 5-unit set of empty intermodal well cars coming out of presumably Winston? These were likely bad order cars coming off of the Winter Haven intermodal system, or maybe the FEC at Miami. By that time of the morning we had had enough of the Central Florida vibe. Well, not really. It was a few hours later and no trains had come, so we decided to go somewhere else for a couple trains that we did know were coming. Lucuchi. There was a shot here that I wanted to try out, 2 of them actually. So it was down Cummer Road and onto the dirt road that parallels the siding all the way through, to wait for yet another empty phosphate train coming south on the S-line, K227. This one doesn't run very often, but when it does, it's empty phosphate hoppers out of Wixom, Michigan, back to the Bone Valley, the same place that 811 was going from earlier. I don't know what customer these cars are coming back from, but either way, a solo AC-44 hauling a long train of phosphate hoppers through Lucuchi was pretty cool, especially since we had just gotten one earlier. Just to note, this shot wasn't this open when we got here. Thanks to CSX's upkeeping of scenery, or rather downkeeping of weeds, most of the brush next to the tracks was dead, which made it easy to kick down before the train got here.
CSX detector milepost 825.9 speed 45 no defects, repeat no defects, total axles 326, length 4830, detector out.
The curve shot came out fairly well for video, but for pictures not so much. So that was one shot down. Now we moved up to our next location to wait on our next 2 trains. This is only about 1,500 feet north of our last spot at the very north end of the siding. This was one of the locations I shot the K870 from a couple videos ago. I kinda like the idea of the shot in daylight, so I thought I'd try it out here. To my knowledge, X453 was coming south, labeled X for the Wildwood maintenance curfew which is going on right now. But that wouldn't be the first guy to show up. After about an hour and a half of waiting, A782, the Wildwood local which can service customers anywhere between Ocala and Zephyr Hills, was headed south past our position, and he wasn't wasting time either.
Here north end Lucuchi, 782, 6524 south out.
Now 453 was in range after getting a signal not a minute after 782 passed. We were fairly occupied while we waited on these trains. Obviously there's no leash law in this town. People's dogs were just wandering everywhere all willy-nilly. And they were friendly too, so I can't complain. And obviously they're used to this kind of thunder rolling through.
0. Detector out.
XX 453, 23 South Locomotive 272, clear north end 8 City.
92, making his outward trip from Tampa headed to New York City, marks the beginning of the sentimental rush hour through Plant City, a number of trains back-to-back in the evening, though that would only be 3. Obviously, Amtrak was over the road first, and not too far behind him was QO46, nightly intermodal and UPS traffic out of Tampa's Uceda Yard to Jacksonville's Intermodal Yard, also known as Duval Ramp. 46 books it up the hill with a short train, and then Q442 was to arrive, the last train for the little rush hour at night, nightly mixed freight out of Tampa's Yeoman Yard to Waycross's Rice Yard. And this is definitely one of the highlights from today as well. An out-of-the-ordinary crew hauling an out-of-the-ordinary consist. Tacked right in front of all of the mixed freight traffic was one unit train of ballast, both Herzog and CSX owned cars, many of them also loaded. This is the season for routine maintenance on this southern part of their system, so it's not a huge surprise that these are here, but about 50 to 60 of these on the head of a regular mixed freight was definitely out of the ordinary. Afterwards comes the Tropicana, mixed freight, and auto racks. Y'all thought the party was over? Oh, no, it's not. Now, at the very back of everything, we have a work consist of track maintenance equipment. Maintenance of way vehicles, as they're also seen as. I'm not sure how accurate of a guess this is, but judging by the amount of equipment cars that were here, I'm guessing that this was one or maybe two trains combined, because this was a lot of track equipment. These work consists also include gondolas, boxcars, and what look to be some type of generator cars. Well, that's something. 442 now rounds the curves at Sandler Junction, continuing into the night, and we'd head back to the hotel for a little while and come out for one more train before headed to sleep. Now, after catching that train along with anything else, anyone would assume that one of the other trains in here would have been the highlights of the day, but for me, this one definitely was the highlight of the entire trip. We came back out just after 11 p.m. to catch CSX NO10-19. an as-needed train of loaded coal from Sugar Camp Mine in Illinois down to Apollo Beach's Big Bend Power Station. Tico coal trains, as most rail fans know them. Now, why is this the highlight of the entire trip for me? Well, my thing for these trains is that as-needed status they hold is not very high. They aren't needed very often. Now, a number of years ago, Big Bend Station could be seeing a number of these trains a day, but in 2021, that number has since diminished. Big Bend Station is under a long-term project to convert to natural gas, which, when completed, will obviously phase out coal service altogether. But even as it stands now, these trains are barely running at all. The way this service is working right now is there is only one set of train cars headed back and forth between the 2 points. So once these are unloaded, they'll go back north, and you won't see another one of these trains until it comes back down with loads. And on top of that, that said set of train cars is only running 4 or 5 months out of a year. There's a period of time each year where CSX doesn't run this service whatsoever. Really cool about this service is that it's most often running with a distributed power locomotive, and that was just the case tonight. To me, it looks like they're building up a supply to hold them over, and because of the transition to natural gas, that supply isn't very high. So it doesn't take a whole lot to fill it up. Even though I wish the train could have made it down here in some kind of daylight, I'm more than overjoyed to say that I was able to catch one. And still running with 105 loaded cars tonight, that's not bad either. And the fading EOT would put a lid on today's railfanning until tomorrow. It's now the morning of Sunday, January 24th, 2021, and we find ourselves just south of Winston Yard at the control point, Tancred, on our train of the morning, 0730, a daily local out of Winston shuttling traffic to the Bone Valley. This morning he'd be taking off from Winston with one of the empty phosphate consists which we caught on the main line yesterday. Oddly enough, the engines from both phosphate trains, K811 and K227, were combined as power for this train today. These empty phosphate hoppers are headed down to the giant New Wales phosphate processing plant to be loaded again with phosphate and sent back north at some point. Off of a track authority given, we followed the train south of Mulberry to downtown Mulberry. Right here, about 300 feet behind me, is the Mulberry interlocking, which oddly is in the middle of a street intersection. What I really came down here for were these Y-pattern signals protecting it. Not sure if I'm right on this, but I believe these are the last of their kind standing in Florida as of today. I'm honestly surprised they haven't been replaced yet, considering the diamond itself has been. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, CSX replaced this thing, hence why the pavement is so fresh around here. Off the chase there. I had already seen both of those engines leading their own trains, and the only reason I really went after that train was because I didn't hear anything else running, but I'm quite glad I did. Where we knew something would likely be running by this time, and sure enough, something was fairly soon. Amtrak 91, the Silver Star service running from New York City to Miami, Florida, had finished his stops in Tampa Union Station and was coming up the hill at Lakeland with Aaron Carter at the helm and a slow order on the hill which would require those P-42s a workout. Also, and I can only say this because I'm editing this video after this has happened, but I wouldn't know it today, but this would be the last ever shot that I would get of the old Lakeland Amtrak station. On January 28th, 2021, this old structure has been torn down. For what reason, I'm not sure, but it was fun to see this old place while it lasted. Farewell to the old station. It was after this that we would make our way north on the S line towards Bushnell to see what we could find. I didn't expect to see much of anything, but I did. As we were driving north, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a clear signal for something coming south, and no sooner did I turn my head back to the road did I see a headlight coming right at us. I didn't know what train this was, but we weren't about to miss whatever this was running on the S line in broad daylight. So we booked a U-turn and floored it back south to Lucuchi, so we had ample time to set up for whatever this was. Radio at full volume, it revealed to me that this train was unbelievably Q603, nightly mixed freight from Waycross, Georgia to Winston Yard at Lakeland. Getting by Lucuchi at just before 3 p.m., this train is over 12 hours late, and seeing the consist running by at full speed, it makes more sense to what train this is. Hunks of boxcars for Saddle Creek Logistics, empty phosphate hoppers for the Bone Valley, loaded sulfur tanks also for the Bone Valley, and a lot of them.
CSX detector milepost 825.9er speed 38. No defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axles 9er 58. Length 13820. Detector out.
This was by any and all stretches a lucky break for us. The rest of our time spent along this part of the S line yielded no other trains by no surprise. So it wouldn't be till later this evening that we would find our next trains. But even this would have been a lucky break by our standards. We made it back to Plant City at 6 p.m. on the dot, and immediately heard something on the radio coming towards us, and then saw a headlight at the top of the hill at Plant City Holdout. It was CSX train 0704, a local which runs in the evenings of all Sundays through Thursdays, shuttling primarily rock loads between Tampa and Winston. Though he usually doesn't run until later in the night, this guy was already flying back towards home base at Tampa with a full train of loaded hoppers. last lights of day would be Q046, our nightly intermodal stack train out of Tampa to Jacksonville's intermodal ramp. Though these few loads at the front would be the only ones on the train, the rests were empties. And last one before the night's end would be Q442. Y'all should know this one very well. Nightly mixed freight out of Yeoman Yard, Tampa to Rice Yard, Waycross. A fair chunk of Tropicana and auto racks. This train wasn't very impressive tonight. The DD only clocked him at about 4,500 feet in length. We were able to snag one more before going to bed tonight, Q441, basically the opposite of 442, Rice to Yeoman mixed freight. A lot more impressionable consists in both rolling stock and power. It was nice to see a duo of Yellow-Nose 2 painted AC-44s as the power for tonight's load. Though not quickly, these are diminishing, especially with the new rebuild program that CSX has for these engines. That would be all for today once again, until tomorrow. Waking up the next morning, we made a swift dash over to 10th Street after checking out of our hotel, as we heard of yet another late Q603 to Winston Yard. Though this one not being as late, it still swung them over into the daylight slot down here. Though not much daylight, as a heavy fog had set in from the night before, making for a very unique and eerie shot as 603 rolls down the hill to Winston. It would look like a potash train coming down the hill to Winston, but this was 603. He just had a big hunk of it on the front of his train this morning. This stuff would eventually make its way to Sebring for handoff to the U.S. Sugar Railroad. This potash will be used to nourish their hundreds of thousands of acres of cane fields.
603 Winston, over.
603 got by us just after 8 o'clock a.m., and there would be no other trains through our areas until about 11 a.m. By this time, we had moved over to Tampa when Amtrak 91 found us again. By the looks of things now, this day was likely to end almost empty-handed, but that certainly would not be the case. We had come over to Yeoman to try to find our Palmetto sub-local, 0750, and follow him back south toward home. And that would be quite the chase, but after racking up over half an hour of video time already, I'll save that for the next video. I appreciate you watching whatever you did of this one. This was quite a long one, which is why I'm breaking these two up, but I promise it won't be too long before I get the next one out, because it was definitely a fun chase. As were these other 2 days, hanging out with all of my friends, and new ones as well. I'm not going to mention names, because if you met me in Plant City, you know who you are. And for that, I thank you. Until the next video, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see y'all next time on the Sunshine State Rails.